Her phone rang at exactly the wrong moment. Or maybe it was exactly the right one. Jenny would spend weeks trying to figure out which. She had been sitting at that table for almost 20 minutes, talking, laughing, feeling the particular relief of a conversation that flows easier than you expected. The man across from her was quiet in a way she found interesting rather than uncomfortable. He listened like he meant it. And when she made that joke about spicy food building character, something moved at the corner of his mouth that she decided to count as a smile. She was happy. Genuinely, softly happy. Then her phone lit up. Hyun-soo's name on the screen. She picked up smiling, expecting logistics. Instead, what came through was a voice full of apologies. Something came up. Can we reschedule? I'm so sorry, Jenny. The words landed one after the other, like small, quiet waits. She held the phone away from her ear and squinted across the table. Hard. The way she always did when the world refused to cooperate without her glasses. And slowly, in the space of about 4 seconds, everything she thought she knew about the last 20 minutes rearranged itself. She said, carefully in Korean, "You are not who I was waiting for." It wasn't a question. The man across from her held her gaze. Then he said, "No, just that." Calm as still water. The embarrassment came first. Hot and immediate. She had sat down at a stranger's table, ordered food, talked for 20 minutes about fermentation documentaries and whether suffering built character, and not once had this man said a word to correct her. She needed to know why. He spoke before she could ask. Quiet, unhurried. "The food is good, and I want to hear more from you. You should stay." Jenny looked at him. She knew she should go. She was embarrassed, and her real date had just canceled, and the sensible thing, the logical, self-preserving thing, was to apologize and leave. But she had been having a genuinely good time up until 30 seconds ago. And something about the way he said it. Not a performance. Just simple. Direct. Like he meant exactly what he said, and nothing more. She stayed. And over braised mackerel, and 2 hours she did not budget for, something quiet and enormous began. Welcome to Afro-Korean Love Stories. On today's episode, I'm bringing you power, romance, love triangles, jealousy, betrayal, and dangerous choices. If you're just joining us for the first time, hit that like button, subscribe, seat back, and allow me draw you into my world of tales. Tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. I'd really love to know. Now let's get back to this amazing story. Let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand how Jennifer Williams ended up at the wrong table with the most dangerous man in Seoul, you need to understand who Jenny was before that Thursday. She grew up in Atlanta, in a Nigerian-American household where her father kept books on every surface and her mother believed that how you carried yourself was the most important thing you would ever wear. Jenny was the quiet one, not the invisible kind of quiet, the observant kind. The kind that sits at the edge of a room and sees everything, and says very little, and remembers all of it. The friend who recalled your coffee order, and the thing you mentioned in passing for months ago, and the face you made when you said you were fine, but clearly were not. She was brilliant. Funny in that dry, unexpected way that makes people laugh a beat too late. And she was the kind of dependable that people built their emergencies around, without realizing they were doing it. Korean culture found her the way things do when they're going to matter, quietly, and then completely. A drama, a song, an app on her phone during lunch breaks that became 2 hours past midnight. Nobody handed her the language. She learned it the stubborn private way, piece by piece, until the words stopped feeling foreign and started feeling like a second skin she was growing into slowly. When the fellowship to Seoul came, she said yes before she finished reading the email. Her mother sewed her a new dress. Her father said go, and make the world make room for you. She landed at Incheon with 2 suitcases, functional Korean, and the quiet electricity of someone finally walking towards something they have wanted for a long time without saying it out loud. That was 2 years ago. Yonsei. Meipogu. A life built small and intentional and genuinely good. And 3 months before that Thursday, she matched with Park Hyun-soo on a language exchange app and felt, for the first time in Seoul, like something personal might be starting. He was warm in the way that reads clearly even through a screen. He texted thoughtfully, remembered small details, and once sent her a playlist with no explanation except "This reminded me of something you said." She listened to it 3 times. She told nobody that. She was careful with it the way she was careful with everything she actually wanted. She let it grow slowly until he suggested they meet, and she was more than ready. That Thursday, Jenny tried on 4 outfits. The first was too casual. The second felt like she was trying too hard. The third was perfect until she turned around. The fourth, a deep burgundy wrap dress her mother had pointed to on a video call, saying, "Keep that one. You'll need it for something good." She put on and finally exhaled. She took her time on her lips. 2 shades layered until she found the combination that felt right, turning left then right in the mirror, completely absorbed. She was running late. She didn't stop. She grabbed her bag, slipped into her shoes, took one last look in the hallway mirror, and walked out feeling ready. The glasses were still on the bathroom sink. She was already in the Uber, halfway to the restaurant, when her hand went into her bag by habit and found nothing. She looked up at the soft, blurred city streaming past the window. Her stomach dropped. The driver noticed her shifting, asked in Korean if she wanted to turn back. Jenny looked at the time on her phone. 12 minutes late already. "No," she said. "Keep going. It's just a first date. I'll manage." The Uber pulled up and she stepped out, straightened her dress, squared her shoulders, and pushed open the door. The restaurant was intimate. Low light. The kind of place that smelled like something slow-cooked and serious. She scanned the room through the soft blur of her unaided eyes, and at the far end, she found what she was looking for. A figure sitting alone. Dark jacket. Nothing ordered yet. It matched. The build, the posture, it matched the photos Hyun-soo had sent. She felt a small bloom of guilt. He had been waiting. She crossed the room, slid into the seat across from him, and said, slightly breathless, already apologizing, "I'm so sorry. You haven't been waiting too long, have you? You should have ordered something. Honestly, you have to try the mackerel. I read about it, and I think it might change my life." She picked up the menu and held it close to her face, squinting at the print. The man across from her said nothing. She kept reading, heart beating a little faster than she wanted it to, thinking she had offended him by being late and trying not to spiral about it. She flagged down a waiter, ordered the mackerel, asked if he was ready to order too, gesturing lightly in his direction. He ordered, quietly, without looking at the menu. And something about that, the stillness of it, the ease, made Jenny slow down slightly and actually look at him, as much as she could without her glasses. He was sitting with the particular calm of someone who is completely at home inside their own silence. It was not cold. It was not rude. It was just still, in a way she found, against her better instincts, very compelling. She told him he seemed taller than she expected from his photos. She asked if he had been here before. She apologized for being late and then corrected herself and said actually she wasn't late. She was just adequately last minute, which was a completely different thing. She said it with a straight face and waited. The corner of his mouth moved. She counted it as a smile. Their food arrived and the conversation found its rhythm, her leading it warmly, him following it quietly, the two of them sharing a meal like it was the most natural thing in the world. She talked about a documentary she had watched on Korean fermentation. She asked his opinion on whether spicy food built character or whether that was just something people said to justify suffering. He said, both. Just that. And something about the precision of it made her laugh, genuinely, the kind of laugh that catches you before you can make it smaller. She was happy, genuinely, softly happy. Then her phone rang. She picked up smiling, expecting logistics. A 5-minute warning maybe. Instead what came through was a voice full of apologies. Something came up. Can we reschedule? I'm so sorry, Jenny. I really am. She sat very still. When she lowered the phone, she looked up slowly at the man across from her. Really looked, squinting hard the way she did when the world refused to cooperate without her glasses. And in the space of about 4 seconds, everything she thought she knew about the last 20 minutes rearranged itself into something that made absolutely no sense. The build was similar. The dark jacket. The aloneness of him. But this was not Hyun-soo. She could see that much even without her glasses. The energy was different. The stillness was different. Everything was different, and she had been sitting here for 20 minutes ordering food and talking about fermentation documentaries, and she had not noticed once. She said slowly in Korean, "You are not who I was waiting for." It wasn't a question. He held her gaze. No. The embarrassment arrived all at once. Hot, complete, merciless. She had sat down at a stranger's table, ordered food, carried on an entire conversation, called a waiter. And this man, this very calm, very still, very unbothered man, had not said a single word to correct her.
Not one.
For 20 minutes. Why didn't you say anything? She asked. She genuinely needed to know. He was quiet for a moment. Then, your Korean was too good to interrupt. Jenny blinked. She opened her mouth, closed it, looked down at the half-eaten plate of mackerel between them, the mackerel she had enthusiastically recommended to a complete stranger, and felt the laugh building before she could stop it. She pressed her lips together. It didn't help. She laughed, quietly, into her hand, shoulders shaking slightly. And when she looked back up at him, he was watching her with that same stillness, except something behind his eyes had shifted. Something that looked almost like warmth. She should go. She knew that. Hyun-soo had canceled. She was sitting at the wrong table. The polite thing, the sensible thing, was to apologize properly and leave. But she had been having a good time. An unexpectedly, genuinely good time. And the food was there. And he was looking at her like she was something he hadn't encountered before and couldn't quite look away from. And her heart, which had never once in her life waited for her head to finish its sentences, had already made a decision. He spoke before she could. The food is good, and I want to hear more from you. A pause.
Stay.
Not a command. Not a question either. Something in between, like an open door. Jenny looked at him for a long moment. Standing halfway, chair-adjusted hands on her purse and phone, stuck in that moment between leaving or staying and seeing this through.
Fine, she said.
But I'm still recommending the mackerel. Then she picked up her fork, readjusted and smiled a bit. The corner of his mouth moved. A real one this time. She was almost certain. And just like that, over a meal neither of them had planned to share, something quiet and enormous bega.
And
she thought about him the whole way home. That was the part that unsettled her. Not the embarrassment of the wrong table. She had made peace with that somewhere between the second helping of mackerel and the moment he almost smiled. Not even the canceled date, though that sat somewhere tender in her chest. What unsettled her was the ride home. The way she sat in the back of that Uber watching Seoul blur past the window and realized she had not thought about Hyun-soo once in the last 2 hours. Not once. She was still thinking about the way he said stay. Not demanding. Not pleading. Just stay. Like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. Like she was already supposed to be there. She got home, found her glasses exactly where she left them, put them on and stood in her bathroom mirror for a long moment. The burgundy dress. The lip combo she had spent 20 minutes on for a date that never happened. She looked at herself and felt something she could not name. Not quite happy. Not quite confused. Something in the middle that had no clean word for it. She changed into her pajamas and called Cousin Naza. How was the date? Jenny was quiet for a second. He canceled. Jenny. But I ended up having dinner with someone else by accident. A long pause. By accident. I sat at the wrong table. The shriek that came through the phone made Jenny hold it away from her ear. She was smiling before she could stop herself. She didn't tell Naza everything. She never did, not immediately. She kept the parts that mattered close until she understood them herself. But she told her enough. That he was quiet in a way that felt intentional rather than cold. That he listened like it cost him something. That he told her to stay, and she did, and she was not sorry about it. Naza asked, "What's his name?" And Jenny realized she didn't know. She had never asked. He had never offered. 2 hours at a table in Mapogu, and she did not know his name, and somehow that had not felt like a gap until right now. She lay in bed that night with the ceiling above her and that nameless feeling sitting quietly on her chest. Not heavy, just present. The kind of feeling that knows it is not going anywhere. Hyun-soo texted the next morning. A long one. Thoughtful, the way he always was. He explained the family emergency properly. His mother had been taken to hospital. Nothing critical but frightening enough to pull him completely out of the evening. He apologized again. He asked if she would give him another chance. He said he had been looking forward to meeting her for weeks, and one bad Thursday didn't have to mean anything if she didn't want it to. Jenny read it twice. Then she set her phone face down on the table and made herself a cup of tea and stood at her kitchen window watching the morning version of Mapo Goo come alive below her. The thing about Jenny was that she did not abandon things she had invested in. 3 months of conversation was not nothing. 3 months of playlists and remembered details and voice notes, and the kind of consistent warmth that is easy to dismiss until you're the one receiving it, that was not nothing. Hyun-soo had not done anything wrong. Life had simply been inconvenient on a Thursday, and he was asking for another chance with his whole chest. She picked her phone back up. I hope your mom is okay. And yes, let's try again.
She hit send.
Then she stood there and waited to feel certain about it. The certainty didn't come, but she told herself that was fine. Normal even. She was still telling herself this 3 days later when she walked out of a convenience store in Mapo Goo and found him standing on the pavement outside. She stopped. He looked at her. Then he held something out, a small bundle of cards, worn soft at the edges, tied together with a thin elastic band. Her motivation cards. The little handwritten ones she carried everywhere, the ones with her name written neatly on the back of the first one in her own handwriting. She had not even noticed they were missing from her bag. She took them from him. Their fingers didn't touch. She was aware of that specifically. You left them at the restaurant, he said. She looked up at him. She had questions. How did he find her? How did he know where she'd be? But something about the calm way he was standing there made all of those questions feel unnecessary. Thank you. I never got your name. Minjun, he replied. I'm Jenny. Even though he hadn't asked. I know, he said simply, and nodded once toward the cards in her hand. She looked down. Her name, written in her own handwriting on the back of the first card. Of course. She laughed, the quiet kind, almost just an exhale, and he watched her the same way he had watched her at the restaurant, like it was something worth paying attention to. They stood on that pavement in the afternoon light and talked for 20 minutes about nothing consequential. She told him she was a freelance tech consultant, that she had come to Seoul 2 years ago and simply never left, that she had a bad habit of losing small things and an equally bad habit of not going back for them. He listened. He offered just enough of himself to keep the conversation breathing, that he knew this part of Mapo Goo well, that he preferred it to the louder neighborhoods, that he ate alone often and didn't mind it. She filed all of it away quietly, the way she filed everything. When they eventually ran out of pavement-sized reasons to keep standing there, he asked, the restaurant, this Friday. Jenny thought about Hyun-soo, about the text she had replied to with her whole responsible heart, about the rescheduled date she had already agreed to, about 3 months of something real and careful that deserved a fair chance. I already have plans Friday, she said. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite disappointment, more like patience. The particular patience of someone who is used to waiting for what they want. Saturday then, he responded. Jenny looked at him for a long moment. All right, Saturday works just fine. She walked home with her motivation cards in her hand and the feeling sitting on her chest again. Heavier now, warmer, more complicated. Friday was Hyun-soo. Saturday was Minjun. And she was standing in the middle of something she had not planned for and could not yet name, trying to be fair to everyone, including herself. She would figure it out. She just didn't know yet how much there was left to figure out. Friday arrived the way important days do, quietly, without announcement, carrying more weight than the calendar suggested. Jenny stood in front of her mirror and had the outfit sorted in 15 minutes this time. No 4-outfit spiral. No rehearsed conversation starters. She was calmer than she expected to be, and she wasn't entirely sure that was a good sign. She took the subway to Hongdae and found Hyun-soo already waiting outside the restaurant, hands in his pockets, scanning the street for her. The moment he saw her, his whole face changed. Not performed, genuine. The kind of smile that arrives before a person can decide whether to show it. He was taller than she expected. She caught herself thinking that and felt a small twist of guilt low in her chest. She had thought the exact same thing about someone else recently. In a different restaurant. At the wrong table. She pushed it down and smiled back. You look beautiful, he said, and the simplicity of it landed warmly. No performance. Just a man saying a true thing. You look like someone who's been waiting a while, she replied, and he laughed, easy and open, and held the door for her, and just like that the evening began. Hyun-soo was everything he had been in 3 months of messages, just made 3-dimensional.
Warm.
attentive. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He remembered things she had mentioned in passing weeks ago and wove them naturally into conversation in the way that only people who genuinely pay attention can do. He made her laugh twice in the first 10 minutes, real laughs, not polite ones, and each time he looked quietly pleased with himself in a way she found completely endearing. The food came, and the conversation deepened. He talked about his work, not in the way people talk about work when they want to impress, but in the way people talk about something they actually care about. He talked about his mother, who was home now and recovering and had apparently already resumed her habit of rearranging his furniture whenever she visited. Jenny laughed at that, and he watched her laugh and smiled the smile of someone storing a memory. She was present, mostly, but underneath the warmth of the evening, running like a quiet current she couldn't switch off, was Saturday. The bookshop. The way he had held that book. The particular quality of his silence. She would be mid-sentence with Hyun-soo and a corner of her mind would drift, and she would have to pull herself back with both hands and remind herself, "You are here. Be here." And she would be, for a while. And then the current would pull again. She hated herself a little for it, because Hyun-soo was good. Not complicated good or interesting from a distance good. Just good. Genuinely, straightforwardly, here in front of you good. And she had been wanting something like this for long enough that the feeling of it, of being looked at across a table by someone who had shown up and meant it, landed somewhere real. By the time dessert arrived, she had stopped fighting the distraction and simply let herself be where she was. With this man who had remembered her coffee order from a conversation 3 weeks ago and ordered it for her without mentioning it until the cup appeared. With this man who reached across the table at one point to brush something from her sleeve and then pulled his hand back carefully, like he didn't want to assume. "I'm really glad you said yes," he said quietly, toward the end of the evening. Jenny looked at him across the table. At his open, honest face, at the effort he had made, and the care he had shown, and the 3 months of something real that had led them both to this table. "Me too," she said. And she meant it. That was the complicated part. She genuinely, completely meant it. She took the subway home that night with Hyun-soo's warmth sitting in her chest and Saturday sitting right next to it, and the impossible arithmetic of 2 real feelings with no clean resolution, keeping her wide awake long after she should have been sleeping. Saturday came anyway. Minjun was waiting outside her building at 7 in the evening. She hadn't told him where she lived. She had stopped being surprised by things like that. He looked different outside the restaurant. Same stillness, same economy of movement. But something about the open air of the city around him made him seem less contained. Like a version of him she hadn't seen yet. He didn't tell her where they were going.
She didn't ask.
He took her first to a small pojamika tucked into an alley off the main road in Mapogu, the kind of place with plastic stools and fogged-up awnings and a Haenyeo grandmother behind the counter who called Minjun by a nickname that made Jenny look at him sideways. He ordered for both of them without consulting a menu. The food arrived in small clay pots and tasted like something that had been made the same way for 40 years because it had. How do you know this place?" Jenny asked, wrapping both hands around the warm pot. "I grew up near here." It was the most personal thing he had said to her. She filed it away carefully. They walked after that. He moved through the city the way people move through places they have memorized not by choice but by living, unhurried, instinctive, turning down streets without announcing them. He took her to a rooftop she would never have found alone, up a staircase behind an unremarkable door in an unremarkable building, and when they stepped out onto the open air, the Han River was below them, catching the last of the evening light like something out of a painting she hadn't known existed. She stood at the edge and forgot to speak for a moment. "I've lived here 2 years," she said eventually. "I know. I have never seen this." "Most people don't," he answered quietly. "You have to know where to look." She turned to look at him then. He was already looking at her. And the evening light and the river and the particular silence of a rooftop above a city at dusk created something between them that neither of them named, but both of them felt. She looked away first, adjusted her glasses, told herself to breathe. They ended the evening at a night market that only appeared on rainy evenings, and it had begun to drizzle softly around 9, the city damp and glittering, where a man sold tteokbokki from a cart that had no sign and needed none. Minjun bought 2 portions and handed her one, and they stood under the narrow awning of a closed shop eating in comfortable silence, while Seoul moved around them wet and luminous. You do this often? She asked. Just wander. When I need to remember what the city feels like, he responded. Without everything else. She understood that. More than she expected to. Does it work? He looked at her for a long moment. Tonight it does. Jenny looked down at her tteokbokki. She could feel her heart doing what it always did, filing paperwork, making decisions, running ahead of the rest of her. She knew what she was feeling. She had known since the bookshop, honestly. Maybe since the restaurant. Maybe since the moment she squinted across a table and realized the world had rearranged itself, and she wasn't even upset about it. But she also knew what she had felt on Friday. Across a different table, with a different man who had shown up warm and whole and real. 2 feelings. Both true. No clean answer anywhere in sight. He walked her back to her building. They stood on the pavement outside, and the city hummed quietly around them, and she looked up at him. Really looked, glasses on, nothing blurred, and thought that this was exactly the kind of moment her heart had been trying to tell her something important, and her head was working very hard to delay the conversation. Thank you, she said softly. For tonight. All of it. He nodded once. That stillness. That patience. Jenny. She waited. I'd like to do this again. Not a question. Never quite a question with him. Just a door, left open, waiting to see if she would walk through it. She looked at him for a long moment. At this quiet, complicated, unexpectedly gentle man who had shown her a city she thought she already knew and made it feel entirely new. Ask me again, she said softly. In a little while. He held her gaze. Then the corner of his mouth. The almost smile. The one she had stopped pretending she hadn't memorized. She went inside before her heart could file any more paperwork without her permission. And this is where I want to stop and ask you something, because if you've made it this far you already know what's coming. Jenny is standing between 2 men. One who shows up warm and steady and says all the right things, and one who says almost nothing at all but somehow makes her feel everything. Have you ever been there? Torn between what makes sense and what makes you feel alive? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story is doing something to your chest right now, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and stay close. Because up next is where everything changes. And I promise you, you are not ready. The weeks that followed were the kind Jenny knew she would remember for a long time. Not because anything dramatic happened. Because nothing did. It was just walks.
Drives.
Small, repeated moments that accumulated into something she hadn't been prepared for. He would text late in the evening. Nothing elaborate. Are you home? Or simply a location dropped without explanation, and she would show up and find him leaning against his car on a quiet street somewhere in the city, hands in his pockets, waiting. They would walk. Sometimes for an hour. Sometimes longer. Through parts of Seoul she had passed 100 times without seeing. The narrow alleys behind Mapogu where the old and new city existed side by side, the riverside paths that emptied out beautifully after 10 at night, the small streets that smelled like street food and rain, and something she had no word for yet. He talked more on those walks than he did anywhere else. Not much. Minjun would never be a man of many words, but enough. Small pieces of himself offered quietly, without announcement. The neighborhood he grew up in. The meal his grandmother made every Lunar New Year. The fact that he had read the same collection of Korean poetry so many times the spine had given out twice. Jenny listened to all of it and filed it away in the careful private archive she kept of things that mattered. And little by little, without drama or declaration, her attention moved. She still saw Hyun-soo. She still showed up and tried and found real warmth there. But she noticed the difference. The way an evening with Hyun-soo felt like something she was choosing responsibly, and an evening with Min-jun felt like something she was being pulled toward by something deeper than choice. She noticed that she checked her phone differently depending on whose name she was hoping to see. She noticed that on the evenings Min-jun didn't text, she sat with a restlessness she couldn't explain away. She noticed. She tried not to. She noticed anyway. 3 weeks in, she stopped arguing with herself about it. Her heart had been filing the paperwork since the bookshop. Probably since the restaurant. The only thing left was the courage to act on it, and to close a door she had left open out of fairness to a man who deserved better than someone half present across a dinner table. It was a Tuesday when Minjun took her to a small gallery in Itaewon that wasn't listed anywhere online. The kind of space that existed only because the right people knew about it. The artist was an elderly Korean woman who had spent 40 years painting the same stretch of coastline in different light. Every canvas was the same place. Every canvas was completely different. Jenny stood in front of one. Early morning light, the water pale gray and very still, and felt something move through her that she couldn't put language to. The same small place, painted over and over, finding something new each time. There was something in that she recognized deeply. She stood there for a long time. Minjun stood beside her and said nothing. He didn't try to fill the silence or explain the painting or ask what she was thinking. He just stayed, present and unhurried, giving her the moment entirely. And that was when it settled. Not because of the painting, because of that. Because of the particular quality of being beside someone who gives you your moments instead of interrupting them. She turned to look at him, and he was already looking at her, and everything she had been carrying for weeks became suddenly, quietly clear. She knew. She called Hyunsu that evening and asked if he could meet her for coffee. He said yes without asking why. She liked that about him, his easiness, his lack of suspicion. It made what she had to do feel harder and more necessary at the same time. She told him the truth. Simply, carefully, with all the respect that 3 months of something real deserved. That she had valued everything they had built. That he was a genuinely wonderful person. That somewhere along the way her heart had made a decision, and she cared about him too much to keep showing up halfway. Hyunsu listened without interrupting. When she finished, he turned his coffee cup slowly between his hands, and was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Is he good to you?" The question caught her completely off guard. Her throat tightened. "Yes," she answered softly. "He is." He nodded. Something moved across his face. Honest and human, and not quite pain. Not quite peace. "Then I hope it works out," he said. And she believed him entirely because Hyunsu was exactly the kind of person who meant something like that when he said it. She walked out of that coffee shop carrying the particular bittersweetness of a door closed gently. No slamming. No damage. Just a quiet click and the knowledge that something genuinely good had simply not been the right thing. She stood on the pavement outside and took a breath, and then she called Minjun. He picked up on the second ring. "What are you doing tonight?" she asked. "I want to spend some time with you." A beat of silence. Then, "Come to mine." Something moved through her chest. Warmth and nervousness and the particular electricity of a door opening for the first time. In the weeks they had been seeing each other, she had learned his favorite streets and his preferred silence, and the specific corner of his mouth that meant he was more amused than he was letting on. But she had never been to where he lived. Had never seen that version of him. Had wondered about it quietly, more than she admitted. She had just closed one door and decided to walk through another towards someone she barely knew on paper, but knew completely in the ways that had always mattered most to her. Her heart had filed the paperwork. Again. She followed it anyway. His building was in Hanamdong. She knew the neighborhood. One of those parts of Seoul that wore its wealth quietly, understated in the way only truly expensive things can afford to be. The lobby was minimal and serious, and a man at the desk nodded at her like she had been expected before she said a word. The elevator opened directly into his penthouse. She stepped out and went still. It looked exactly like him. Spare, deliberate, considered. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 sides with souls spread out below like something from a dream she hadn't known she was having. Books on shelves she hadn't expected. Organized not by aesthetics, but by what looked like actual reading order, some of them spine-cracked and clearly loved. A kitchen that suggested he actually used it. Small details everywhere that contradicted the version of him the world probably saw. A worn leather journal on the coffee table, a coat thrown over a chair with the ease of someone who is genuinely at home here, a single plant on the windowsill that had clearly been there long enough to become part of the furniture. He gave her a quiet tour. Not performative, just moving through his own space naturally, letting her see it. She asked about the books. He pulled one off the shelf and handed it to her without ceremony. The poetry collection, spine gone soft from use. She held it carefully, like something that had been trusted to her. You actually live here, she said, almost to herself. He looked at her. What did you expect? I don't know, she admitted honestly. Something that looked less like a person. The corner of his mouth moved. She smiled back, and the evening opened up into something easy and warm. The two of them moving around his kitchen while he cooked, her sitting on the counter asking questions he answered in that precise, unhurried way of his, soul glittering 40 floors below like it was performing just for them. Later they drove to the Han River. Not the tourist stretch, a quieter bank further out, where the water moved without an audience. They sat on the bonnet of his car with the city at a distance, and the river doing its quiet, unhurried thing in front of them, and for a long time nobody said anything at all. He reached over and took her hand. Not dramatically.
Not with a speech.
Just reached over and held her hand like it was something he had been meaning to do for a while and had finally decided the moment was right.
Jenny looked down at their hands.
His still and certain. Hers. Now held by someone who had returned what she lost and then quietly, patiently, shown her a city she thought she already knew and made it feel completely new. She leaned her head against his shoulder. The river moved. The city glittered. And for the first time since that Thursday in Mapogu, everything inside her felt completely still. She felt like she had made the right choice. She had decided to follow her heart and ride on the thrill. 3 weeks later, he invited her to dinner. Not a walk, not a drive.
Dinner.
At the penthouse. She arrived to find the kitchen already fragrant and warm, the table set simply, the city doing its evening thing beyond the windows. It felt different from the other evenings, more deliberate, more settled, like something that had quietly become a habit neither of them had announced. They ate and talked, and the conversation moved the way it always did with them, her leading warmly, him following with that careful precision that she had long since stopped finding mysterious and started finding deeply comforting. She told him about a project she was consulting on, a tech startup in Gangnam with more ambition than infrastructure. He listened and asked one question that immediately identified the exact problem she had been trying to articulate for a week. She stared at him. How did you? Same problem exists in other kinds of organizations, he said simply and refilled her glass. She laughed. He watched her. The evening was warm and quiet and completely, perfectly ordinary. Then his phone rang. He glanced at the screen and something shifted, barely, almost imperceptibly, in the set of his shoulders. He excused himself and stepped away. She didn't think anything of it. She carried her glass to the window and looked out at Seoul and thought about nothing in particular. He was gone for 7 minutes. She knew because she was looking at a photograph on a shelf, a younger Minjun, standing beside an older man with the same eyes and the same stillness, and she counted without meaning to. When he came back into the room, the weight was different. Not visible to most people. Visible to her. Everything okay? She asked without turning from the window. He was quiet for a moment. She heard him set his phone down on the table. There's something I need to tell you, he said. She turned to face him. Tell me. He sat down. She had never seen him sit down like that before. Not with weariness exactly, more with the particular weight of something carried a long time that was finally being put down. Before you, he began, there were arrangements made. Between my family and another. A business alliance. Old. Long-standing. A pause. They consider it current. Jenny went very still. An arrangement, she repeated. What kind of arrangement? What do you mean? A marriage arrangement. She went completely still. The apartment was quiet in a way it hadn't been all evening. Her name is Seo Yunji, he continued. Her father and mine made the agreement years ago. Now that I have fully assumed leadership of the organization, they are calling it in. Do you love her? The question came out of her mouth before she had decided to ask it, and the moment it left her lips, she felt the bitterness of it. The particular bitterness of a word she had heard recently in a different context, sitting across a coffee table from a man she had just hurt by choosing this. The memory of that door she had closed. The choice she had made with her whole chest. And now this. She sat in his penthouse 40 floors above Seoul and felt the full weight of the irony pressed down on her, that she had given something up, had followed her heart across what felt like a cliff edge, had decided that for once she would just let herself have something good. And now this. She spiraled. Quietly, completely, behind her eyes where he couldn't see it. A million thoughts arriving at once. How much she still didn't know about him, his family, his world. How it had all felt almost too seamless, too right, too easy in the ways that mattered. How she had sat in that gallery on a Tuesday and felt completely certain, and certainty was supposed to feel like an answer, not a setup. She was still spiraling when she felt his hands settle gently on her shoulders. The touch was quiet and certain, and it pulled her back from the edge of herself immediately. She looked up at him. "Her name is Seo Yunji," he said again, carefully. "I have never loved her. I have never chosen her. And I am telling you this because you deserve to know everything." She held his gaze, searching it, finding nothing but honesty. She exhaled slowly. Then she turned and walked to the window and pressed one hand against the cool glass and looked out at Seoul, vast and indifferent and completely, heartbreakingly beautiful, and thought about what it meant to choose someone, and then discover that the world they lived in had already made different plans. "What do you want to do?" she asked quietly. Her breath fogged the glass slightly. He crossed the room and stood behind her. Close. Not touching. She could feel the warmth of him. "I want to find a way," he said. "If you'll let me." She looked at their reflections in the dark glass. His face above hers. Still.
Certain.
Patient in the way that had undone her from the very beginning. She turned around. They were close enough that she had to look up at him. "Then find it," she said simply. And in his eyes, beneath all that careful stillness, something finally came fully, completely alive. He found a way. That was the thing about Minjun. He was not a man who made promises he hadn't already mapped a route to keeping. But it took time. And time, Jenny was learning, felt very different when you were the one waiting on the other side of it. He told her what he could. Not everything. There were parts of his world he kept deliberately away from her, not out of dishonesty, but out of something closer to protection. But enough. The CO alliance had existed for over a decade. It was structural, woven into the financial foundations of the organization in ways that made it difficult to simply dissolve without consequence. Chairman Seo was not a man who accepted renegotiation gracefully. The inner circle of the syndicate had made their position clear. The arrangement was not personal, it was institutional, and Minjun's personal feelings were, in their estimation, not the point. Minjun listened to all of it. He nodded in the right places. And then he went about things his own way, quietly, and without announcing it, the way he did everything. Jenny, meanwhile, was navigating something she hadn't been given a manual for. She had never been the kind of person who sat still while someone else handled things on her behalf. It wasn't in her. But this was a world she didn't fully understand. Not its rules, not its language, not the specific geography of its loyalties and obligations. And Minjun had asked her, in the careful way he asked her things, to trust him, to let him work. So she tried. Some evenings were easy. He would come to her apartment in Mapogu, something that had become quietly natural, him in her space that was small and warm and full of the books he had helped her choose, and they would cook together badly and talk, and the weight of everything outside would recede for a few hours into something manageable. Those evenings she trusted completely. Other evenings she sat with her phone and the silence and the knowledge that somewhere on the other side of the city a woman named Seo Yunji existed, and a family that considered her promise to someone Jenny had chosen with her whole heart, and a world with rules older than anything she had walked into with her blurry eyes and her motivation cards and her burgundy dress. Those evenings were harder. She called Naza on one of those harder evenings. Sat on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet the way she had since she was a teenager when things got heavy, and talked it through. "Do you regret it?" Naza asked. "Any of it?" Jenny thought about the gallery, the rooftop, the Han River at night, the way he held her hand without making it a moment, the poetry collection with the broken spine, the evening in his kitchen when he asked one question and solved a problem she had been circling for a week, the way he looked at her, like she was something he had not expected and had no intention of letting go of. "No," she said. "Not for a single second." "Then stop sitting on the floor," Naza said, "and trust the man." Jenny laughed despite herself, got up off the floor, made tea, went to bed. She trusted him. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of Minjun moving through his world with a patient, precise intelligence that had built his reputation, not through force, not through confrontation, but through the same careful restructuring that had always been his greatest strength. He found what he needed in the finances. The CO alliance, for all its presented permanence, had a thread that could be pulled, a series of investments that the Jiang organization had been propping up quietly for years, absorbing losses that the CO side had never fully accounted for. Minjun had always known this. He had simply never had a reason to use it before. He presented Chairman CO with a restructured proposal. A new agreement, financial, formal, binding in the ways that actually mattered to men like CO, that preserved the alliance, protected both families' interests, and dissolved the marriage arrangement entirely. No drama, no war, just a better deal, offered by a man who had done his homework and was not asking. Chairman CO was not pleased. He made this known through the appropriate channels, with the appropriate displeasure. Then he signed. Because at the end of it, Minjun had given him no rational reason not to. And rational men, in irrational worlds, still follow the numbers when the numbers are undeniable. Yunji received the news through her father. She was quiet about it in a way that suggested, to anyone paying attention, that she was more relieved than she was letting on. She had spent her life on the edges of arrangements she hadn't chosen. This particular one ending was not the tragedy it might have appeared from the outside. Minjun told Jenny on a Wednesday evening. No ceremony. She was sitting on his kitchen counter, her preferred spot, the one she had quietly claimed over months of evenings in his space, eating fruit from a bowl and telling him about a client call that had tested her patience significantly. He listened, and when she finished, he said simply, "It's done." She went still. The arrangement? Gone. She set the bowl down slowly, looked at him across the kitchen. This man who had taken a problem built over a decade and dismantled it in 3 weeks through sheer patience and precision and the particular kind of power that doesn't need to raise its voice. Just like that, she said softly. I told you I would find a way. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she got down from the counter and crossed the kitchen and stood in front of him and put both hands against his chest and looked up at him the way she had that night at the window, searching, finding, keeping what she found. Minjun, she said quietly. Jenny, I sat at your table by accident. Something moved in his eyes. I know. I didn't know who you were. I know. I still don't know everything, she said honestly. About your world. About what it means to be in it. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'll show you. As much as you want to see. At whatever pace you want to go. She nodded slowly. Then, was the mackerel always that good, or was that just the situation? The corner of his mouth moved. A real one. The fullest one she had ever seen from him, and she had been cataloging them for months. Come back and find out, he said. She laughed. He pulled her into him and held her, and outside the window's soul did its glittering, indifferent, beautiful thing 40 floors below, and inside that kitchen it was just 2 people who had found each other sideways and improbably and completely, and had fought, each in their own way, to stay found. Some stories begin with intention. 2 people who chose each other clearly from the start, who moved toward each other with full information and open eyes and a plan. This one began with a woman who forgot her glasses and sat at the wrong table. With a man who let her stay because her voice was the first thing in years that had felt like rest. With a canceled date and braised mackerel and a corner of a mouth that moved almost imperceptibly and a woman who decided to count it as a smile. It began with wrong, and it became the most right thing either of them had ever stumbled into. Jenny would tell Naza afterward that she still didn't fully understand it, how something could start so accidentally and become so certain. Naza would say that was exactly how the best things worked, that if you had seen it coming you would have talked yourself out of it. Jenny thought about that for a long time, about all the very sensible reasons she'd had to leave that restaurant, to not go back to the bookshop, to not answer the texts, to not follow a quiet man through the city at night learning the parts of Seoul that didn't make it onto any map. She had ignored every single one of those reasons. Her heart had filed the paperwork. It had been right. It was always right. So here is what I want to leave you with. Minjun had everything, power, empire, a world that moved because he told it to. And the one thing that undid him completely was a woman who sat at his table without permission, couldn't see clearly without her glasses, and talked to him about fermentation documentaries like he was just a person. Sometimes the most dangerous thing that can happen to a powerful man is someone who doesn't know to be afraid of him. And sometimes the bravest thing a quiet woman can do is stay at the wrong table long enough to realize it was the right one all along. Now I need to hear from you. Were you Team Hyunsoo or Team Minjun? Because I know some of you were rooting for that man and his playlists, and I completely understand. Drop it in the comments and tell me why. And for those of you who have ever followed your heart before your head caught up, did it work out? Tell me everything. If this story did something to you today, you know what to do. Like this video, subscribe to Afro-Korean Love Stories, and turn on your notifications because the next story is already waiting, and I promise you it is going to hit just as hard. Thank you for being here. Now go call someone you've been thinking about.